Government executive.
Government executive.
Government executive.
Government executive. Government executive.
Government executive.
Government executive.
Up Close, Conversations with Federal Leaders is underwritten by Tableau.
Hello, I'm Tom Shoup, Editor-in-Chief at Government Executive, and we're here this morning with Robert Wilkie, Secretary of Veterans Affairs. His department has played a critical role in the response to the coronavirus pandemic, and he's here to tell us a little bit more about that. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Secretary.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Maybe if we could start with a sort of broad question, what have you learned about leadership and crisis management during the pandemic?
Well, the benefit that we have here at VA is that almost everyone in our leadership has extensive military experience. All of us have learned crisis action planning from the times we were young officers. And that is a benefit I think that we have that has helped us through this. In fact, as a result of that, we were the first to establish emergency operations centers, not in February or March, but during January, in anticipation of what was coming. It also allowed us to make tough decisions by putting our patients and their safety in a special perspective. And those tough decisions were early on stopping elective surgeries, stopping face-to-face visits for normal medical appointments, but more importantly, depriving, in a sad way, depriving our most vulnerable veterans of the sustenance of their families and friends by cutting off visits to our 134 nursing homes. We took that decision early. We were criticized for it, but as we speak, as of today, if you were to look at the 7,500 patients that we have in our nursing homes currently, only 4 are infected with COVID. So our emergency measures have worked. One other thing about crisis leadership and crisis action planning, we actually rehearse these things because our fourth mission is to provide the nation healthcare support during times of crisis, natural disasters, or in this case, an epidemic. So we rehearse these things all the time, mostly tornadoes or hurricanes. But even during the Mission Act, which was the largest reformative piece of legislation that this department has faced in the last 50 or 60 years, we war gamed it. We set up an emergency operations center, and that actually allowed us to transition right into emergency operations for COVID. I speak with our VISN directors on a regular basis. We review the PPE status and the health status of all of our employees on a regular basis. It looks just like an operations center in the Air Force. So we've taken those lessons we've learned, and I think it has benefited the entire department.
How has your own day-to-day work changed? Are you teleworking some?
I rarely do that. I'm back on the road. Prior to this, in the year and a half that I've been secretary, I've been in 44 states and all the territories in the Pacific. I feel that walking the post is essential in any organization, no matter what the size, but I had to curtail that. I've just recently started back. I've been in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, Michigan, and I'm headed to Norfolk and North Carolina today. That has changed, but the day-to-day focus on making sure that we have enough equipment in the right places, what we call in the Navy cross-decking, that those operations were going smoothly, making sure that we are able to provide the nation with support. Give you an example. We have nurses now in the Navajo Nation and actually several other Indian nations providing healthcare. We have nurses who are learning the Navajo language to better provide healthcare for those who are probably not even veterans, but that's part of our fourth mission. And we've done it now in 46 states and territories, and we're very proud of that.
There's also been an increase both in telehealth initiatives and telework on the part of your own workforce. What have you learned about that? And are there going to be permanent changes as a result of those initiatives?
Absolutely. If there's one thing to come from this in terms of future operations, it is that we were able to stress telehealth, stress the system. In a normal month, let's just look at mental health. In a normal month, we have about 40,000 mental health teleappointments. In June, that number was over 900,000. So what has that done for us? It's allowed us to increase the size of our footprint in rural and tribal America. And the reason that is important is that the vast majority of America's veterans live in rural America and in tribal America. And what we've done with this is we've given them greater access by actually placing less stress on themselves and on their families by forcing them into a clinical situation. We're also working with a company like Walmart to set up telehealth clinics inside Walmarts all across the country. That allows a veteran, particularly in rural America, to walk into the pharmacy section of a Walmart, show his veteran card, and go in and sit down and talk to a doctor or a specialist anywhere in our system. So telehealth is the wave of the future. It cuts down on stress. It cuts down on expenses. And ironically, it's the people of my father's generation, Vietnam, who have really taken to this. When I first looked to expand this program, I thought, well, it's going to be harder for veterans who are in their mid-70s to adjust. But they have taken to it just as well as younger veterans have, and we're very pleased by this.
How have you had to shift resources and operations in recent weeks with the surge in cases in the south and west parts of the country?
Now, ironically, what has happened is that we have actually fewer hospitalizations now than we did when the surge began in the south and the west. As of yesterday, we had around 600 positive patients in our hospitals, and that's 600 out of 14,000 beds that we have. So we haven't seen that. We've actually seen a decline now in the last few days in terms of positive cases. But we have continued to open our doors to non-veterans populations in Florida, in Texas, in Arizona. Actually, I visited Arizona a few weeks ago. So we are doing what we need to do for the fourth mission. But let me add to your question. We are preparing in the event that this boomerangs on the country in the fall and the winter. That's what we're doing. We're preparing for the eventuality of flu and COVID coming together. And as a result of that, we're not only stockpiling equipment, but Tom, we've thrown out the old playbook on hiring. We've hired just in the last 7 or 8 weeks over 30,000 Americans, about 6,000 nurses, and 90% of those hires are permanent. And that's one thing that I don't want to go back to, a process where in many cases it took a year to onboard someone who wanted to work for the federal government. We've cut that down to 7 to 10 days, and we're seeing thousands of Americans flock to us. And it has been one of the great stories to come out of this crisis, along with telehealth.
So are those changes in the hiring and onboarding process, those you think will be permanent?
Yes. And in fact, if they're not, we've asked the Congress to make them permanent. We think they can be, but to hedge our bets, we've asked the Congress to take a look, see if we need any legislative fixes to make it permanent. I don't want to go back to the old ways of doing things.
Were you given temporary new authorities, or were you able to use flexibilities in the current system?
We had flexibilities, but we were also given a great deal of financial resources. The CARES Act gave us $17 billion, and we've used some of those monies to really ramp up our hiring practices and change the processes. So we don't have to spend weeks looking at, I'll give you an example. There's no need for us to spend weeks or months looking at the credentials of someone who is qualified to be a resident in cardiology. Just use an example, Duke University, one of the great teaching hospitals on the planet. Duke's certified, and we don't need to go through any processes in terms of educating that person. That person's already qualified. So we've been able to do some common sense things that I think in the end will help the entire federal government when we sit back and take a look at what's happened.
Are you sufficiently staffed now, or are you continuing to look to hire more people?
Oh, we want to hire as many people as possible, particularly in critical areas like nursing and with our physicians. We've done just fine. We've gone over our authorized ceiling, but that's okay because we're in an emergency situation. And as I said, 90% of those 30,000 that we've hired are permanent. But I've told all of our network directors to really push hard and hire as many folks as possible because that will, in the end, give us a greater opportunity to serve veterans.
There have been concerns on the part of employees since the pandemic began about shortages of personal protective equipment. How have you addressed those?
Well, let's take a step back and look at what actually happened. Not one person who was on the front lines in a COVID ward or an emergency ward or any of our hospital wards ever had a shortage of equipment. In fact, not one of our hospitals ever got below 2 weeks of supply. Now, what we did was to say that those people who work in our healthcare system who had no contact with patients, they were not going to get 2 or 3 changes of equipment. And that, I think that upset some people. But we have to remember that for the first time in our fourth mission or in our emergency status, we were competing with the rest of the country for supplies. No longer did we have clear supply chain avenues that we would normally expect because the rest of the country was competing and that equipment was being distributed. But what we've been able to do is stockpile for what may come. And I think we're in an excellent place. We have months of supplies on hand, and we've come through with shining colors. And I would also note that the infection rate among hospital staff for VA is probably the lowest on the planet. It's less than half of 1%. And we have to remember that our employees and our veterans don't live on military installations. They live in the community. And if you look at what happened in my parents' hometown of New Orleans, that week of Mardi Gras, we were hit with thousands of veterans and employees who were infected simply by walking the streets on Mardi Gras Day. So we have come through. I think our story, particularly when it comes to our nursing home, is one of the best stories in government in the last few months.
Are you now able to test all employees, and how frequently?
Well, we test employees who need to be tested. We're not going to give everyone a test just to give a person a test. In our nursing homes, we do test all of our employees. We test all of our patients. Our veterans have been told by us through tens of millions of individual communications that if they don't feel well, tell us. If they have symptoms of this, tell us. We'll make sure that they're taken care of. We'll make sure that those tests are distributed. But we've conducted hundreds of thousands of tests across VA for both employees and veterans.
How would you characterize overall morale at the department right now?
Well, I can say that in the last 2 years, morale at VA is at an all-time high. 4 years ago, we were 17 out of 17 in terms of best places in government to work. In the last 2 years, we've hit 6 out of 17 with the nonpartisan Partnership for Public Service. But the statistic that I have used in testimony is that we have fewer requests for leave and fewer absences now than we did this time last year. Our employees are staying on their posts. They are fulfilling their oaths in ways that I think the rest of the government and the rest of the country should be proud. Doesn't mean that we don't have hiccups, but it does mean that not only are those statistics showing how well we are doing in terms of places to work, but those statistics show that people are on the line, they put themselves in danger, and they continue to do so on an unprecedented level.
Is the funding that the VA has received under the CARES Act, is that sufficient? And outside of the hiring, where else is that money going?
Well, that money goes for things like supplies, it goes to telehealth, it goes to homeless programs, it goes to treatment, COVID treatment, not so much general operations because we have the largest budget in the history of our department, $220 billion. For next fiscal year, I presented a $240 billion budget. The House took that and raised it by $10 billion at $250 billion. So we're at an all-time high when it comes to funding. Of the $17 billion, I think we've used $4 billion of it. I think that's right. I could be a little off, but no, we have sufficient funding for what we think might be coming later in the year.
One thing that's been delayed as a result of the pandemic was the rollout of the VA's electronic health record system. Where does that stand right now, and what's the long-term impact there?
Well, I think this goes to your question about employees and the agility and adaptability of VA. I intend to roll it out this late summer or fall. While the epidemic's been going on, we have been working with the Department of Defense. All 73 of the interfaces with the electronic health record now work. We are now able to pull records out of DOD, and the private sector is now able to put information to our own VA records. So I expect to roll this out in Spokane and Seattle sometime in August and September, and then also start moving it toward VISN 10, which is Michigan and Illinois. And actually, the scheduling portion of that will come online in Columbus, Ohio in the next few weeks. So it is another good news story for government. And we were able to do it even though we took a lot of the practitioners, the doctors and nurses, off of the training in order to get them in the front lines. But there's another thing that's happening in the fall. We will finally close the last of the circles left over from Vietnam, where we will be able to provide the family caregivers of Vietnam veterans financial and material support. Caregivers were supported, but not Vietnam veterans, my father's generation. So while we've been fighting the pandemic, we've been moving forward on the electronic health record and also with caregivers.
You've mentioned VA's fourth mission. Could you describe that in a little more detail and tell us how it's currently playing out?
So our first three missions are Veterans Health, Veterans Benefits, and Memorial Affairs. The fourth mission is to provide the nation foundational support in times of national emergency. What that is usually seen as is support in times of a natural disaster, a hurricane or a tornado. You will see VA providing mobile clinics. You'll see VA providing pharmacies, engineers, doctors, nurses, even VA police. The fourth mission is also one that allows us or has us support the nation in times of an epidemic. Now, we haven't done that on any great level since the early part of the 20th century. But what that means is that when veterans are taken care of, we open up our hospitals. The first place we did that was in New Orleans, and then Brooklyn and Manhattan. We took in 110 non-veteran patients in metropolitan New York. That also included Orange, New Jersey. We're in 46 states right now, supporting state veterans' homes, supporting community nursing homes, and also supporting hospitals. The state veterans home is an interesting one because the Congress has created a legal separation between us and state veterans homes. We have 134 veterans homes within our system. The states have 155. We are precluded by law from controlling or managing those facilities, but we do provide. In this crisis, we've been able to go in and help stabilize those institutions in places like Massachusetts and New Jersey and Pennsylvania. I was just in Pennsylvania yesterday. We're in the state veterans home there, and also in community nursing homes there, as well as in Florida. So just to take a step back, and most of the folks who are executives know this, FEMA doesn't own anything. When there is a crisis, FEMA has to rely on other branches of the federal government. It's usually the two big ones, us and the Department of Defense. So we take on these FEMA missions. As I said, we're in 46 states and territories right now, and we're providing whatever the governors need. I started dialing governors just randomly when this crisis started to make sure that we could get ahead of whatever needs that they have, and we've been able to respond. We have hundreds of VA employees out in the states working with state governments and the localities.
Great. Well, I think we've reached the end of our time, but I just wanted to say thank you very much, Secretary Wilkie, for taking the time to chat with us this morning.
Well, I thank you. I thank you for what you do. And I just want to say, again, I can't thank the wonderful people who work at VA. We have over 400,000 employees. They've remained on their posts, and they have provided not just veterans, but the rest of America with support. And it is one of the great stories in government.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd.